Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Great Thai Consulting, providing management consulting services to help support not-for-profit organizations. Services include C-suite staffing support, executive coaching, and business and fund development. More at greatthaiconsulting.com.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Ksenia Kalar, guest hosting for Evan Dawson. This week, OpenAI made an announcement. They're changing how they train AI models, moving toward intellectual freedom and embracing controversial topics instead of avoiding them. If that sounds like a shift in the Silicon Valley's values, that's because it is. For years, AI companies have walked a fine line, deciding what their models should or shouldn't say, what's considered harmful, and whether AI should ever take an editorial stance. Now, OpenAI says it wants ChatGPT to seek the truth together with users instead of refusing to answer controversial questions. The new policy claims that AI should not lie, omit context, or take a moral position. You might think that sounds great in theory, but what does it mean in practice? If AI chatbots start presenting all sides of every issue, including ones that are factually wrong or harmful, is that really neutrality? There is another layer to this. OpenAI's shift towards free speech happens to align with the new Trump administration stance on tech regulation. Conservatives have long accused AI companies of bias, claiming platforms like ChatGPT favor left-leaning perspectives. OpenAI denies that politics played a role in this change, but critics aren't so sure. So, is this a win for free speech or a dangerous move that lets AI spread misinformation? Is OpenAI adapting to a changing world, or just bending under political pressure? Today, we're diving into the future of AI, free speech, and truth itself. With me at the studio, I have my colleague, Mona Sagotel-Islami, the music director at WXXI Classical. Thank you for joining, Mona.
Yep, excited to be part of making things work as part of live radio and discussing some of the philosophical ideas in this topic.
And hopefully soon to be joined by Jeffrey Allen, PhD Director of the Institute for Responsible Technology and Assistant Professor in the School of Business and Leadership at Nadarus University. You can join the conversation this hour by calling 844-295-8255, or if you're in Rochester, 585-263-9994. You can also email the program at connections@wxxi.org. And you can watch us on the WXXI News YouTube channel, where you can also leave comments in the chat. Okay, Mona, let's kick that in. So, what's your overall opinion on this current OpenAI situation, and what do you think about the regulation that AI is going to probably face sometime very soon?
Well, in general, you might say that free speech is a really good value, but when we look at the idea that lying is one of the things that's allowed, that's strange because that's also, that's not a neutral position. This claim of neutrality is sort of a false thing. And if an action, if it leads to immoral or improper actions, it seems so fraught because there's no ethical or even legal consideration from the actual AI model or the way that it's interacting. So I guess it seems so worrisome and problematic, and even while it's supposedly freeing. So I guess, what are some of the things that you find yourself concerned, like that could happen with it?
So Dr. Jeffrey Allen just joined us. Welcome, Jeff.
Hi, glad to be here, virtually at least.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining in. So OpenAI says this change is about intellectual freedom and presenting all perspectives, but critics argue that it could lead to AI legitimizing false or harmful ideas. Where do you stand on this?
I think that there's some argument to be had there, even if it is a little bit of twisted logic. But when it comes down to it, this is one of those situations where we really need to consider the pros and the cons quite carefully, because it's nice to have the whole free speech aspect of it, but in reality, what's the potential fallout as well is something we need to give some serious thought to.
OpenAI also says AI shouldn't lie or omit important context, but in reality, AI can't seek the truth like a human can. It's just predicting words. How do you think AI models should balance accuracy, neutrality, and ethics?
I often, when I'm using models like ChatGPT, one of the things you always see is the disclaimer at the bottom that ChatGPT can make mistakes. We need to be careful and double check the output. But the reality is that almost seems like they're passing the buck in a way off to the user to do their fact checking on every single query they put in there. And while I think that it's just a good practice to be in, that we verify the information that we're dealing with day to day from AI, I also think that there should be some responsibility put onto the model developers themselves. And, guardrails are always a good thing to have in place. Maybe it's, more accurate to think of it rather than guardrails, more like brakes. When the car is going too fast, we have the ability to apply them and slow them down and keep it in control. So maybe that's a little bit of a better analogy.
Of course, there is a political angle here. OpenAI is making this shift at the same time that the new Trump administration is vocal about AI censorship. Do you think this is truly about free speech, or is OpenAI trying to stay on the right side of the government?
Wow, that's certainly a loaded topic there. We need to kind of, pay some, respect to the reality that a lot of companies these days do seem to be falling in a line politically. OpenAI, on the other hand, I wonder if there's not something deeper going on there. If we look at what Elon Musk is doing on the AI side right now with X.AI and Grok, which just released their newest version this week, it almost makes me wonder if it's not more of an attempt to get ahead of other competitors in the space rather than necessarily politically driven. And there is an argument to be made, I think, and fairly, that when you put restrictions on AI, you're also limiting its potential. But again, we have to kind of weigh the pros and cons here. This isn't sort of like a black or white question. It's a matter of taking all the factors into account. It's like free speech, again, the argument. You can't go into a crowded building and yell fire. You may have the right to free speech, but you don't have the right to incite panic. So we need to kind of think about it like that as well from the AI side.
So I'm actually studying machine learning and AI at school right now. And one of the things that I've been also thinking about is how limiting AI, even in terms of politics, is kind of like telling the person that, no, you cannot lean towards certain Democratic Party. I wonder, what do you think about this comparison?
I certainly think that bias, whether intentional or unintentional, has the ability to influence the way we think about certain topics and the way that we ourselves respond. Whether or not, it goes that far, I'm not quite sure myself at this point, but the reality is, though, that the output is going to influence the way that you perceive specific topics and items, whether it be political, whether it be things like related to healthcare or any other number of topics that can be divisive. The more the bias within the training data, as you know from studying machine learning, is going to have an unintended effect, and it's going to be amplified. So that's one of the things we need to be wary of.
If OpenAI stops moderating responses entirely, could we see AI models become tools for disinformation campaigns?
I think that's not off the agenda. Why wouldn't we? If you could use it for any legitimate purpose, you could certainly use it for illegitimate purposes as well. And so if we are going to use it for things like, the benevolent purposes of free speech, that's also not going, there's nothing to prevent bad actors from using it in the same way. I think something interesting that came up in the news recently was concerning the Cybertruck explosion that happened in DC at the end of last year, and how the individual who planned that attack used ChatGPT to do so. And that was with a censored version of ChatGPT. We're not even talking about an uncensored version yet.
Is fully non-censored version possible at all?
I think it is. I think there's certainly been some attempts on the open source side to create uncensored versions of models, and they've done so with fairly good results. Good being subjective, right? We're talking about AI models that answer anything you ask it, if that's the criteria we're judging by. And the danger, I think, with ChatGPT and OpenAI is it's so much more powerful than these open source models, and they've got so many more resources to throw behind these models. So I think we should be certainly concerned, and I do think it is possible to get it there into an uncensored format.
So you mentioned the Cybertruck explosion and how a person was using ChatGPT to actually plan that. And that made me think that if this new approach is actually free speech, or is it just shifting responsibility away from the company and onto the users?
So the cynic in me says it's the latter, and they're trying to shift responsibility away and try to open it up for various usage, which in its censored version really isn't possible. So I think that there is a possibility that, we can unload some of the burden of censorship and guardrails onto the user and kind of give you more disclaimers that, be wary of anything that the model puts out. So certainly the cynic in me leans towards that side of the argument.
Since there is not much regulation going on in the AI world, do you think we're heading into a future where government pressures AI companies to shape responses in their favor?
We only need to look at DeepSeek Model R1 in order to see that happening already. I've certainly done a lot of playing around, and I've asked DeepSeek things that are considered to be sensitive subjects in China. And without fail, it's refused to answer me, or it's giving me answers that are very, very much in favor of the Chinese government compared to a more balanced, nuanced picture of what actually the situation is.
So do you foresee that in the US that this change can lead to AI reinforcing harmful narratives like anti-science movements or political propaganda?
Yeah, and certainly the thing is, too, that once you open these models up, it's like a Pandora's box. We really don't know what is going to happen, right? It remains to be seen, and we certainly need to consider the fact that that may be the case, that propaganda may become worse than it is right now. Misinformation becomes more empowered. And so those are the types of things that, these are the considerations, again, we need to be thinking about, that free speech versus the reality and the good of society.
What happens if an AI gives neutral responses to topics like climate change, vaccines, or human rights violations? Should AI always present multiple perspectives, even when there is a clear right and wrong?
So that's a good question. Philosophically, I would think that I prefer the right answer. I have seen AI give me, and I pressed it on some, very philosophical issues about things like morality, religion, things like that don't really have clear answers. But it's tended to give me answers which are deferential to the thing that I'm asking about. And I don't like those types of padded or caged, hedged answers. Just because I'm more driven by facts. I want the quantitative. What does it all mean? What are the facts and figures behind it? And so we need to kind of make a determination. Do we want answers that are sensitive to all viewpoints, or do we want answers that are more factually driven? And so it's certainly not something that, it really comes back to what is our end purpose? What groups are we trying to take into account? And is this a subject that needs to be handled with deference, or is it something that's quite, straightforward and clear?
So right now at school, for example, we always have to cite AI when we get the answers from it. However, it's still not considered like a trusted source of truth. And since we're now moving toward a more neutral models, does that mean AI should be used as trusted source of truth?
I think it's getting better. I also think, though, that like with any, research you're doing, we should certainly be mindful of the fact that there could be multiple sources out there. It makes sense to contrast and compare. One of the things that, we typically look at in research is what is the dissenting opinion? What's still, the weaknesses of the answer, or what is the information that we're not taking into account contextually? There's certain things we need to think about. And the reality is that, we certainly kind of need to take into account multiple perspectives here.
I see. I'm Ksenia Kalar, sitting in for Evan Dawson, and today in Connections, we're talking about AI, free speech, and the future. I'm joined by Jeffrey Allen, PhD Director of the Institute for Responsible Technology and Assistant Professor in the School of Business and Leadership in Nazareth University. Jeff, I would like you to talk a little bit about your tech experience and your AI experience as well.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I've spent about 25 plus years in the tech industry. I started working with some of the big companies, including IBM and SAP. And I've worked on both the software engineering side as well as the more business management oriented side of the tech industry. I moved away from that and more towards the world of startups out in Silicon Valley. And the longer I was out there, the more I started to see that there was an opportunity to do things with a bunch of data that was sitting around, but no one was really making use of. So I founded a company called Echo Ridge back in Boston. And this company picked up some support from Dartmouth, and we started creating algorithms that could predict the outcome of regulatory and legislative actions across the United States. So basically every state, as well as the federal government, every week we would look at what legislation was out there, and we could tell you this legislation is going to pass, it's going to fail. These are the reasons it's going to pass and fail. So we had some fairly robust AI at our disposal. But we decided at the time that it was a really divisive area to be in. We didn't want to start predicting legislative and political outcomes because it was just an area that I don't think we had much appetite to be involved with. But it also was something that potentially could add to the divisiveness that existed already politically in the country. You know, this is, 2018, 2019, right around that era. And so we decided to go in a different direction where we looked at how legislative and political actions could impact businesses. And so we kind of created a more, I would say, downstream usage of our AI, and it was a fairly novel and unique approach to doing predictive machine learning as well as artificial intelligence in general. And that's a little bit about my background and experience with it. But I will say that my observation of the tech industry more broadly has been that there is obviously a profit-driven motive. There is an idea that we need to get traction, we need to capture the market, we need to get ahead of our competition. Those things are fundamentally incompatible with the things that are more oriented towards the safe and responsible usage of AI. And so when we do start to think about our innovations in AI as a country, as an industry, we really need to start to think about how do we balance those two particular points of view and motivations.
I'm also personally very excited about adoption of AI in the universities and schools. Could you also tell me a little bit of your work in Nazareth and what exactly you do there?
Absolutely. So the Institute for Responsible Technology at Nazareth looks at emerging technologies, primarily artificial intelligence, to see how it will impact society. I mean, it's fair to say our focus is more towards how businesses adopt AI and then from there how it affects society. But we're concerned with things like bias. We're concerned with things like irresponsible usages of AI, such as abusing people's privacy and things like that. And so the Institute is on one end interested in doing partnerships with the business community where we can kind of act as a guiding voice in a way as AI becomes more prevalent within business and society. We also have some degree programs for undergraduate students, and as of the fall, we'll likely have a graduate program as well, which is intended to train students to not only be competent with the technology around artificial intelligence, but also be able to ask the right questions about whether it's being deployed responsibly and ethically. And that's something that I think most programs out there right now just aren't really focused too much on that. I mean, it might be a chapter in a book or it might be a side note, to what is really being discussed in classes. But for us, we put a good amount of focus on ensuring that the ethical and the responsible is addressed just as much as the technology is.
That's a great point, actually. I personally think that as we have Writing 101 compulsory for all the undergrad students now, we should have Prompt Engineering 101 as well. Do you agree with me?
Agreed. And we actually just this semester, one of my colleagues, Mark Weber, he launched a new class, which is called AI for Everyone. And it is essentially what you're describing. It is getting undergraduate students on board and comfortable with using AI and doing so in a way that's responsible.
How about schools? Are there any programs currently in the US that help like high schoolers or middle schoolers understand AI better?
I've heard of some programs out in California at UCLA. I know that there's a center out there that looks at high school students and particularly those from disadvantaged, underrepresented backgrounds and helps them get skills and capabilities within AI that will hopefully be useful to them as they continue their educations and ultimately launch into their own careers. That's the one that I'm familiar with so far. There may be some other efforts out there. I haven't really seen them publicized, but I have to imagine that there is some thinking, because I know here in New York, the school districts, particularly in this part of the state, are thinking about AI a lot and how they introduce it to their students. I've certainly given a lot of talks at school districts and combined school districts, and I've actually been encouraged by how forward-thinking they have been about this topic.
So my next question goes beyond OpenAI. AI companies are now in the business of information, and they decide what's true, what's false, and what we see. Do you think it's too much power in the hands of tech companies?
I think it's certainly a lot of tech power that they have, and we should certainly be asking what their responsibilities are and what their accountability is. And it's not just limited to AI. We could make the same argument about, social media companies 10, 15 years ago. Their algorithm dictates what comes across your feed. So inadvertently, or actually maybe intentionally, they're influencing what you're thinking, what advertisements you're seeing, what posts are influencing your political views. So a lot of this has already been seen within the social media sector. Now we're seeing at a whole new level just because of the pervasive power of artificial intelligence and its ability to create things which they're rapidly creatable, as well as very, very authentic and genuine sounding. So if we think about, AI and its ability to come up with images, someone was saying to me the other day that they start to question every image that they see now, saying, oh, this might be AI, or maybe it's a real image. So I start to discount information across the board. I become more skeptical of everything because now I don't know what's real and what's not. So there is a decent amount of power put onto these tech companies just by the nature of what they do. We can certainly take a lot of lessons, though, from what happened with social media and, some of the things that were just in retrospect, looking back a decade now and saying, oh, these things were harmful. And now is an opportunity for us to be able to learn from the past so that we're not repeating these mistakes in the future.
We got a question from Bob in Rochester, and he's wondering, what is the difference between the algorithms from years ago, nanomarketing, and AI?
I think that sophistication and capability is a big part of it. That's probably the easiest way to answer that question, where if you think of what you saw years ago as version 1, now we're probably about on version 3 in terms of capability. The speed at which things can be done, the flexibility at which things can be done, these are a lot more than we could have done even just 5 years ago. And even in between the versions of the models themselves, there's a lot of capability. I actually had the opportunity, because of our role at Echo Ridge, to work with the original version of ChatGPT. And I thought it was a novelty at the time. I looked at it, it could write short pieces of text and it could sound like a human. But if you compare it to what's out there today on 4.0 or 1.03, there is just so much progress that's been made on the capabilities of these models. And in terms of being able to deal with multimodal type input, such as images, videos, long documents, anything of that nature, it's amazing. I mean, it's mind-blowing to see just what the capabilities are these days.
One of the things that we often talk about at school and also at my job in WXXI is the bias. And I was wondering if you think it's possible to build an AI system that truly represents all perspectives without reinforcing bias.
And that's a difficult to answer question. I do think we could get there. I don't think we're there in the immediate future. The reality is that the information that we're relying on is biased. And I mean, like it or not, with a background in psychology, I feel it's fair to say that every human has some bias one way or the other. And so almost everything you're going to come across is from a certain point of view in terms of information. And that's the same information that's being used to train these models. Now, these models don't really understand bias one way or the other, but they do amplify it very, very well. And so you can see it in terms of its output. And I know there's efforts right now. I am involved tangentially with an effort over at the University of Rochester and is the Emerging Strong AI Institute to create AI that can train other AI without bias. I don't know if that's something that's going to happen in the very near future, but I certainly think it can happen in the midterm at least.
So what do you think is the biggest ethical dilemma that's going on in the AI world now that we maybe do not talk as much about as we should?
There's certainly a very big debate and argument about the training data that's being used on AI. Authors and other artists are obviously not happy with their data being used to train these models and then essentially put them out of a job. I understand their point of view, and there's certainly some legal arguments to be made here, and I'm not a lawyer, so I really can't speak well to those. But the idea that once we train all of this data on the works that have been created by these individuals, and we don't need these individuals anymore, we're irreparably doing them harm. Now, we've seen a couple of cases in recent history here. Thomson Reuters, with their Westlaw product, just won a case last week related to a legal AI startup using all of their Westlaw data to train the startup model with. And so that was one case where it went in favor of the copyright holders. But I've seen other cases so far where large parts of the arguments have been dismissed. So it's something that's still there being litigated right now through the courts. But I do think protecting copyright holders' rights and defining what those rights are an issue that's going to become, important here in the very near term, because it also plays a role in how AI will continue to develop in the future.
We are going to take a short break now, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the future and where do we go from here with my guest, Jeffrey Allen, PhD and Director of the Institute for Responsible Technology and Assistant Professor in the School of Business and Leadership at Nazareth University.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Greater Rochester Habitat for Humanity's Restore, a nonprofit home improvement store offering donated furniture, housewares, and appliances in support of the mission to build homes for the community. More at grhabitat.org/restore.
This is Connections. I'm Ksenia Kalar, sitting in for Evan Dawson, and we're talking about AI with Jeffrey Allen. You can join the conversation this hour by calling 844-295-8255, or if you're in Rochester, 585-263-9994. You can also email the program at connections@wxxi.org, and you can watch us on the WXXI News YouTube channel, where you can also leave comments in the chat. So, Jeff, the next thing I want to talk about is the future, and if OpenAI changes something, do you think other AI companies will follow? And are we about to see a broader shift in how AI handles free speech?
That's probably a very good observation that we're going to see AI companies follow the lead, because they really won't have a choice. When we look back to the whole idea of shareholder value and things of that nature, when it comes to running these companies, they have a fiduciary duty to make sure that they're at least staying in line with their competitors' moves so that they remain competitive. So I don't really see that they're going to have much of a choice. And again, that really speaks to some of the deeper problems in terms of compatibility of what these companies are doing and the greater good of society. But it's also one of those things that we just have to acknowledge is going to happen, and it's pretty much inevitable.
Are we approaching AGI, or is it still just hype? And also, if you could just talk a little bit about what AGI is for some of our listeners who might not be very familiar.
So AGI is the pinnacle, I guess you could say, of AI. It is AI that does things. Number one, it's not a unitasker. It just doesn't do one thing in particular, but it can do everything and do it to the same degree that it would be indistinguishable from a human doing it. So that's the idea of AGI. And I have seen some news floating around from Sam Altman in particular over the last month or so about, how we're on the brink of it. I don't know how much of that is hyping up OpenAI versus how much of it's reality. I certainly think that from my experience with our current state of AI, even in the latest models, we're not there yet. There's certainly some limitations. I was having a conversation yesterday with an AI agent on camera. And one of the things that I took away from that was that there is a lack of the human nuance within the conversation that makes it very obvious that I'm talking to AI, not talking to a human. Whereas you might feel a little bit of, awkwardness in a conversation, or you might have pauses that are unnatural or natural for us, unnatural for AI within the conversation. Things of that nature, just a little ticks that people have. AI does it too well. We would often say when we were having these type of agent conversations that the AI feels omnipresent and omniscient. And unfortunately, most people are not omnipotent or omniscient. So there tends to be hesitations in what they're saying. There tends to be filler words. There tends to be, a little bit of a laugh when they come across an awkward situation. And that's missing from AI, that human type feel to it. So just from that level alone, I don't think we're close to AGI, but then there's capabilities, right? AI is fairly easy to trip up still. You can lead it down certain paths. You can get it to do questionable things. All you have to know is how to prompt it and how to get it in that direction. So I don't think we're there in the coming year. I do think, it could happen within the next 5 years or so. And that's actually, dialing it way back from what I initially had thought, because the very first time I came on Connections, I think I made a prediction of it within the next 30 years. And then I was also surprised to see just how quickly things were progressing. But we're not there yet.
We have a call from David from Rochester who wants to discuss toxic algorithms. Hi, David. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Oh, what was your question? If you could just briefly talk about it.
Yeah, sure. I was turned on to this movie called The Social Dilemma by an RIT producer, videographer. And it really kind of goes and chronicles how algorithms used by Facebook and, that's really meta, are highly toxic. And they did a great thing. They interviewed coders who were instrumental in coding Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and other social media platforms. So I'm just kind of curious whether your guest has has watched it, and any comments regarding that, since algorithms are actually developed, I believe, now by AI a lot quicker.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair observation. It kind of comes back to what I was talking about earlier with social media and how a lot of what we're probably going to see is going to be an amplified version of what we've experienced within the social media side. Obviously, Facebook has taken a lot of flack, and I think rightly so, for the way it developed its algorithms, particularly, 5, 6, 7 years ago, when it's fair to say Facebook was more relevant than it is right now. But their goal, obviously, is to capture their audience, keep their audience on Facebook as long as possible, and to make sure that they're seeing and reacting to as many ads as possible. So we're starting from that point of view. We're starting from that motivation. And the reality is that you're going to do whatever you need to do with very little thought to ethics or the overall well-being of your users in terms of being able to accomplish those ends. So that's kind of like, I feel like that's a fair portrayal of where they are and where they have been in the terms of developing algorithms. And it's not just, of course, Facebook. It's almost every social media company out there that would like to do the same things. Facebook just did it better. And as these things came to light, they either changed them or apologized for them. But the reality was, if they hadn't come to light, they probably would still be in place right now. There's very little reason for them to be apologetic when, no one is complaining about it.
My next hour, I'm going to talk about getting jobs as young adults and recent grads. So I kind of want to shift our conversation a little bit towards AI and work. And I'm a big advocate for AI actually providing more jobs than taking. So I was wondering, what do you think, if AI actually creates more jobs than it destroys, or is it just too optimistic?
It's going to destroy a lot of jobs. That's absolutely going to happen. It's going to be things that are primarily repetitive, things that are easily automatable. We think about back office data entry. The healthcare industry is a big one because we talk about, the potential for a lot of job losses there. It won't be doctors and nurses and frontline folks. It will be people sitting in the back office doing billing and coding for insurance and doing patient records and things of that nature. So we need to be mindful that there will be a significant shift in terms of how people are employed and what industries they're employed in. I think about things that people, are learning these days, which are, within university campuses, which very, very quickly are going to become outdated and obsolete in the era of AI. That said, though, we need to start thinking about how we train people to, number one, be very good with using AI, very competent at using AI. And then number two, thinking about how that will fit within the future workforce. So obviously jobs that are very reliant on people skills, something that AI is probably not going to be able to replace in the near future. And I think those are some of the safer areas, things that require skills that really do have a physical interaction side to them. Those are other areas which are probably safe for now. But when we get to all these white collar positions that, things like software coders and other people of that nature, where Google is already using 25% AI generated code right now within their products. Those are the types of folks who really need to start having a serious, serious thinking towards how AI is going to affect their future livelihood. And so that's kind of like, I would say thinking about future proofing and thinking strategically how you fit into that, this future that's AI powered.
Thank you for mentioning the code. I honestly do not know how it would be passed in my machine learning class if we did not have Gen AI now, and I hope my professor is not listening to this program right now. So we use AI a lot in terms of our decision making, both within work and school and outside of it. But do you think if we are moving towards the world is moving towards AI just making all the major decision making, or do you think that will still be up to people?
In the near future and probably through the midterm, there's likely to be a lot of distrust and skepticism on AI's capabilities to make decisions. And I think that's a good stance to have. We should be skeptical. We should be verifying everything that AI puts out there. In the long term, as AI gets better, I really don't know. Maybe we'll shift towards something where a lot of decision making is happening by AI and we're just overseeing it to a much lesser degree. And it's just one of those things when we think about how AI comes to make these decisions and what responsibilities we give it, we need to really think about the pros and the cons here. I tell you, one of the areas that worries me the most is military technology. I'm a former Marine myself, and I have a good appreciation for the destructive power of military weaponry. And the idea of AI, autonomous AI, making decisions with this type of weaponry just really frightens me. And I think we should be really concerned about those type of applications and lack of oversight within those type of those systems.
That's another thing that I keep thinking about, actually, if AI will be used more as a weapon or as a tool for peace and diplomacy.
You're probably going to run into both sides, to be fair. It's just like in the world of hacking, you've got your white hat and your black hat hackers. It really depends on what your motivations are and what your morals and ethics are. I would think that nation states will see AI as something that is a national security interest. It's something that can be utilized to become cheaper, quicker, better than your rival nations, and it will absolutely be put to use in a way that could be destructive. Ideally, you'll have no choice except to engage with that type of behavior, and hopefully we'll do it from a point of view that will be peace is always the primary goal, and the idea that having systems that can counter these bad actors will also be a deterrent.
Could AI lead to a new kind of geopolitical power shift where the countries that lead in AI dictate global policy?
I think that's a very good observation. It's something I'm actually doing a little bit of research on with my colleague Saray Liu over at Nazareth right now. We are looking at how the dynamic will shift in terms of outsourcing, because during the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of work that could be offshored to countries like India or the Philippines in the call center world, for example, where it was lower wages and cheaper to outsource to call centers there than to run them in the United States, they will now be losing the advantage of cost effectiveness and competitiveness that they had previously, because AI can obviously do it even cheaper than the lowest paid person could in a global economy. So how will that affect their economies and their ability to grow and mature within terms of like economics? And so we really do need to think that long term, there's going to be some economic fallout, and policies need to be adjusted to prepare for that. Because what happens when you have a country like the Philippines, for example, which is the largest call center economy in the world right now, what happens when a big piece of that economy becomes irrelevant? What do you do, and how do you deal with that? And it's not just, developing economies, it's also developed economies where, you've got information workers like here in the United States, and we're very much reliant on like the service sector. All of these things really are good candidates for being automated. And so we need to think about long-term policy effects and how we prepare for that, and just what the fallout is going to be, again, because I don't think people are doing a very good job of thinking of that right now.
We got an email from Tracy asking if ChatGPT is safe to use. And I also would like to narrow down this question to, I was wondering if AI is becoming a tool for authoritarian governments to control populations.
There's a lot right there, right? So is it safe to use? Generally speaking, yes. It can only there's not much damage it can do in its current form. Certainly, it may use some of the data that you feed it to train its model more. There's ways to opt out of that within ChatGPT and its competing platforms. There's also the idea of governments using it to reinforce their positions and their propaganda. I look at DeepSeek R1 again. It's definitely very, very favorable towards China in terms of its ideology, in terms of the narrative it wants to put out there on issues like Taiwan, or even going back to like Tiananmen Square. It just refuses to engage, or it paints a glowing picture that favors one side over the other. And I think that's just one example of where we're starting to see issues like that emerge.
So another thing that I've been thinking about is one of the degree that I'm getting at the Simon Business School now is AI in business. So I kind of like to look at people as AI managers in the future, but I also wonder if when the AI becomes more powerful, will we need AI to monitor and regulate other AIs?
Yeah, I think that could be one approach to it. Certainly what we're doing over at U of R right now, the initiative we're working on, that is kind of like in the same vein of creating AI that can become a watchdog for other AI. And that's ultimately where we'd like to be at, where we have multiple layers of protection, where we're not just trusting, then giving disclaimers, hey, the information from the AI may be wrong, so verify it yourself. It would be good to have AI in there that's also acting in a form of like a check and balance for other AI.
And do you think AI models will soon be able to fact check themselves?
I think they can, but you always come back to the issue of bias within the training data, and identifying that bias within the training data, I think, is the bigger challenge than fact checking itself. So we need to think about how do we ensure that the data that's going in there is as bias free as possible. And that's kind of really the key to getting to that point of being able to accurately fact check.
So, coming to the conclusion of our program, I was wondering what's your biggest concern about where AI is headed? And on the flip side, what excites you the most?
I would say my biggest concern is AI that's being developed with more of an eye towards profitability than long-term sustainability and responsibility. That certainly concerns me quite a bit. And I think it's, having conversations like this helps towards, raising awareness, but we also need to take action. We can't be blind to the fact that AI is here to stay. It's not going away. So we need to play an active or a proactive role in helping to shape it into something that will be helpful for us as a species, as a society. And so that's what worries me. But on the flip side of that, I'm very, very encouraged and excited about medical uses of AI. There's actually very little downside in using it for diagnostics and treatment. You don't worry about some of the other issues you might have with more generally facing AI. It's shown its capabilities, for example, within radiology, early breast cancer detection, increasing treatability rates to above 99.7%. There's a lot of things that excite me within the medical field, and I really am eager to see how we put it to use to become something that helps people stay healthier and live longer.
What's the worst case scenario for AI's future that you actually think is possible?
Certainly the worst case scenario I would worry about, autonomous weapon systems worry me a lot. If we think back to the Cold War, there are many documented instances where one cool head was what prevented us from going into a nuclear apocalypse. And whether it was on the Soviet side, whether it was on the American side, there was a lot of people looking at systems and going, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't seem right. And it really did literally save the world. And if you're relying on completely automated systems, everyone here who's ever used a smartphone or a PC knows that systems make errors. They crash. They just do things that you don't understand, and they don't explain themselves well. Imagine doing that with a nuclear arsenal at your disposal. That would be something that certainly worries me quite a bit.
So you mentioned, and we talked quite a bit about kind of making a difference in the AI world and like acknowledging that it's here to stay. And I caught myself thinking a few days ago about that I live in this like bubble of a lot of AI professionals and my classmates who are also learning to become AI professionals in the future. But what are some small things that we can do on a daily basis to like educate people on the AI usage and kind of helping them not to be as afraid of it as they are, but more excited?
I would say getting out there and using it and learning what its capabilities are, and even how you use it like in daily situations that are low risk situations. Like the other day, I said, give me a recipe for some pasta sauce. And I used the voice so that when I was there cooking, it could tell me, what I needed to do. And I would give it some feedback about, what ingredients I had available. And it was a really fluid conversation that made me more productive in the kitchen. And the reality was that I think those low risk use cases like that are a really good way to engage with AI and start to learn what it is, start to peel away some of the hyperbole and some of the jargon around it. Because even in my AI bubbles that I live in, everything tends to be very technical and very dry and all about performance and algorithms and things like that. But when we start to think about AI and what it means as a practical functional tool for us day to day and how it can actually improve our quality of life, we're not going to know that unless we get out there and we start playing around with it and just learning what it is and strip away some of the mystique and the complexity of it.
What are some other prompts that you could recommend people try out, those who do not have any experience with AI usage?
I would say Suno, S-U-N-O, is a program I would recommend. It's a generative AI, but it creates music. You just give it an idea. I want to create a song about being on Connections on Friday, and I want it to be within a pop dance format. And within seconds, you'll have two versions of a song that sound very, very good. Lyrics, vocals, backing music. It's really fun to play with, and it really excites people when they get in there and they start creating their own music. Turning your thoughts into actual songs is something that most people never are able to do within their life. But this is an AI application that just does something really neat. And it's available to use for free to a certain extent. I would say play around with that. I would also, of course, stay with the mainstream ones like Claude, ChatGPT, and I'd even try Grok, Elon Musk's new AI, because from my early experimenting with it, it's actually very, very capable and very fast. And so there's some good aspects to it as well. I would just get out there and, get my hands dirty with all the AI that I could. But Suno is definitely one that people tend to like quite a bit.
What's your favorite Gen AI?
Personally, I tend to spend most of my time in ChatGPT just because it has multiple capabilities in terms of input and output. There's some other things that I've been playing around with a little bit here, such as a program called Lovable, which is an application programming environment where you can go in and describe an application, a program, and it will essentially create the application for you. And it's something that is a game changer when it comes to software engineering. So those are a couple of my favorite ones right now.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing your perspective on AI. It's been a great discussion. I was joined here by Jeffrey Allen, PhD, Director of the Institute for Responsible Technology and Assistant Professor in the School of Business and Leadership at Nazareth University. Thanks again, Jeff. And I'm Ksenia Kalar, sitting in for Evan Dawson. Thank you for listening to member-supported public radio.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from City Magazine, covering arts and culture in the greater Rochester community since 1971. On the web daily and in print monthly. More at roccitymag.com. City, arts, music, culture.